The worst part wasn't the fall. 14 minutes. Caption: the story didn't add up, and the forensic evidence proved it. A child fell from the 6th floor of an apartment building in São Paulo. But that's not the most frightening part of this story. The most frightening part is that everything indicates the worst had already happened before the fall. Today, you'll understand what really happened in the minutes no one saw, and why the silence inside that apartment still echoes to this day. If you close your eyes for a few seconds and imagine the sound of a big city at night, cars passing in the distance, an ordinary building, lights on in a few apartments, nothing seems out of place. But that night something happened. Something that should never happen. A child fell from the 6th floor of a residential building in São Paulo. And in that instant, all of Brazil stopped to try to understand how, and above all, why. It wasn't just news, it was a collective shock, because when a child loses their life, the impact is different. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your age, your story, your reality. There is something universal about childhood. It represents beginnings, possibility, the future. And that night, the future was interrupted. That child's name was Isabella. For weeks, months, years, an entire country tried to piece together a puzzle that seemed impossible. Conflicting versions, strange silences, details that didn't fit, and one question echoed in every home. What really happened inside that apartment? Today, I want to invite you to go beyond the headlines, beyond quick judgments, beyond ready-made phrases. I want to guide you through a story that is not just about a crime, but about human relationships, about control, jealousy, denial, and about how silence can be as deafening as a scream. This is not an easy story, but it is a story that must be told with respect, depth, and humanity. So take a deep breath and come with me. On the night of March 29, 2008, an apparently ordinary Saturday, life followed its normal routine in São Paulo. It was the weekend. Many people were at home. Others were returning from errands, dinners, supermarkets. Nothing indicated that a few hours later, the country would wake up to one of the most impactful news stories in its recent history. Around midnight, residents of a building heard screams coming from outside. Someone was asking for help. Someone said a child had fallen. The first calls to the police began coming in, one after another. Desperation, confusion. When emergency services arrived, the scene was difficult to comprehend. A very small child, lying in the garden of the building, no signs of response. There, in that silent space between shock and disbelief, an investigation began that would forever change many lives, including those who would only follow the case on television. In the first moments, the version presented seemed simple, perhaps too simple. There was talk of a break-in, of an unknown intruder, of an accident caused by a third party. But investigations are rarely linear, and often, the more you look, the stranger everything becomes. Within the first hours, details began to draw attention. Small details, the kind that go unnoticed by those who don't know what to look for. The absence of clear signs of forced entry. Marks that didn't match the initial narrative. And above all, behavior. Because a scene doesn't speak only through objects, it speaks through people, through reactions, through silences, and there were too many silences. To understand what happened that night, it's impossible to ignore what came before. No story begins at its final moment. It is built day by day, choice by choice, conflict by conflict. Isabella was a 5-year-old child, described as cheerful, communicative, affectionate. A child who moved between two worlds, her mother's and her father's. Separated parents, divided routines, alternating weekends, a common reality for many families. But behind the appearance of normalcy, there were deep tensions. Relationships don't end only on paper. Feelings don't obey court decisions. And when adults can't deal with their own frustrations, the ones who suffer most are the children. Over time, conflicts accumulated. Jealousy, arguments, disagreements many considered normal. But normality is a dangerous concept when it comes to human relationships. What for some is just a difficult couple may for others be an emotionally unstable environment. And unstable environments leave marks, even when no one talks about them. That specific night, the family had spent hours outside. A supermarket, an apparently ordinary outing. Security cameras recorded mundane moments. Shopping carts, groceries, children being guided. Everything seemed normal, but there was a time interval that would become crucial. A short interval. Less than 15 minutes. From the moment the car entered the building's garage until the moment Isabella was found outside. 14 minutes. 14 minutes that would be analyzed second by second. 14 minutes that would raise more questions than answers. What happened inside? Who was where? Who did what? And why? The investigation advanced, and with each new step, the initial version began to fall apart. Because the truth, when it starts to surface, never appears all at once. It emerges in fragments, in contradictions, in details that refuse to disappear. And the silence of those who should have been desperate. The silence that didn't match the tragedy. Sometimes, what is not said speaks louder than any word. And as Brazil watched, perplexed, one question became impossible to ignore. Was the greatest threat to that child coming from outside, or from within her own home? That question would change everything. And it is from there that this story truly begins. Before any investigation, before reports, forensic exams, or trials, there is something that always comes first in stories like this: human relationships. No tragedy is born out of nowhere. It grows in silence, in small tensions, in unresolved feelings that no one wants or is able to name. To understand what happened that night, it is necessary to go back in time. Back to long before the 6th floor, long before the fall, long before the shock. It is necessary to look at the adults. Isabella lived between two worlds, her mother's world and her father's world. A divided routine, scheduled dates, alternating weekends. On paper, everything seemed organized. In practice, it was emotionally complex. Separations are rarely simple. Even when a couple goes their separate ways, emotional ties remain. And when there are children, those ties become permanent. There were resentments. There were disputes. There was a constant sense of territory. Who decides? Who is in charge? Who is right? And in the middle of all this, a child. Children perceive much more than adults imagine. They feel the atmosphere. They feel the tension. They feel when something is wrong, even if no one says a word. Isabella moved between these two realities, and each transition carried different expectations, rules, and emotions. On the father's side, there was a new family unit, a new dynamic, other children, another routine. And here begins a delicate point. When families reorganize, not everyone adapts in the same way. What for some means moving on, for others can feel like threat, competition, or discomfort. Power dynamics emerge. Comparisons happen. Difficult feelings gain space, and they don't always appear in words. Sometimes they show up in gestures, in looks, in impatience, in constant criticism, in control. From the outside, people saw a seemingly ordinary family, middle class, residential building, typical weekend routine. But those who were closer could sense that things were not exactly peaceful. Frequent arguments, intense jealousy, emotional outbursts. None of this, by itself, seemed enough to imagine a tragedy. But stories are rarely made of a single event. They are made of accumulation. Another important point: emotional control. Some people deal with frustration by talking. Others shut down. Others explode. And there are those who try to control everything around them so they don't have to deal with what they feel inside. Control over routines, over behaviors, over people. When that control fails, what emerges is desperation. And desperation can lead to irreversible decisions. Isabella, like any child, displayed age-appropriate behavior. She talked. She asked questions. She cried when she felt uncomfortable. But in emotionally tense environments, even the most normal behavior can be seen as provocation. Crying becomes annoyance. Speaking becomes defiance. Presence becomes a problem. And that is terrifying. Because no child should ever be seen as an obstacle. But unfortunately, not all adults are able to separate their own frustrations from the responsibility of caring for a child. There were reports of previous conflicts, arguments that went beyond a normal tone, moments of verbal aggression, an unstable atmosphere. None of this was enough to raise a public alarm beforehand. And this is one of the most disturbing aspects of this case. Many tragedies are announced, but rarely recognized in time. There were reports of previous conflicts, arguments that went beyond a normal tone, moments of verbal aggression, an unstable atmosphere. None of this was enough to raise a public alarm beforehand. And this is one of the most disturbing aspects of this case. Many tragedies are announced, but rarely recognized in time. That specific night, something was already wrong before they even got home. Later testimonies would point to tension, impatience, a heavy emotional environment. And when the car entered the building's garage, it wasn't just a family arriving home. It was a conflict crossing the door with them. The elevator went up, the doors closed, and at that moment, the outside world was left behind. What happened from then on had no direct witnesses, only traces, signs, and consequences. When investigators analyze a case like this, they don't look only at the what, they look at the how and the why. Why certain actions? Why certain reactions? Why did specific versions appear so quickly? And that's when something drew attention very early on, a ready-made narrative. From the very first moments, the version presented seemed rehearsed, without hesitation, without doubt. There was no room for, "I don't know," for, "We need to understand," for, "Help us figure this out." It was a closed story. And that, for experienced investigators, is always a red flag. Because people in shock tend to mix up details, get times wrong, contradict themselves. But here, everything seemed too organized. Another point that caused unease was the emotional reaction. There is no manual for grief. Everyone reacts differently. But there are behaviors that, when analyzed together, raise questions. The absence of certain instinctive actions, the lack of immediate attempts to provide help, decisions that didn't match the expected desperation. This isn't about judging feelings, it's about understanding behavior. And the behavior that night did not match the story being told. Meanwhile, the media began to mobilize. Cameras, reporters, experts. The case was no longer just a police investigation. It had become a national event. But while the public debated hypotheses, the police worked in silence, analyzing every detail, every trace, every contradiction. And little by little, an unthinkable hypothesis began to gain strength. A hypothesis no one wanted to accept, but that was becoming impossible to ignore. There are moments when time stops being just time. It becomes evidence. In Isabella's case, that time had a very specific duration. 14 minutes. 14 minutes between the car entering the building's garage and the moment the child was found outside. No more, no less. For the investigation, this interval became the heart of the entire story. The building's cameras recorded the vehicle's arrival shortly before midnight. It was late. The children should have been tired. The day had been long. The images show a family arriving like so many others. Doors opening, elevator being called. Nothing out of the ordinary. But cameras do not capture emotions. They do not record tension. They do not register words spoken in low voices or looks filled with irritation. They show only the exterior. The elevator goes up. The doors close. And from that moment on, everything that happened took place away from any direct witness. Or almost. When police reconstruct a timeline, every second matters. Who went in first? Who stayed with which child? Who was where? And this is where the first inconsistencies appeared. The initial version claimed that the father went up alone with Isabella, while the stepmother stayed in the car with the other children. And that, minutes later, when he returned, he found the apartment invaded. But the more this narrative was examined, the weaker it became. Because a good story must withstand time, and this one didn't survive even the first questions. Let's think calmly. 14 minutes isn't a long time, but it isn't instantaneous either. It's enough time to enter the apartment, put groceries away, move through rooms, talk, argue. It's enough time for a lot to happen. And that is exactly what began to trouble investigators. When forensic experts entered the apartment, the environment did not match the invasion story. There were no clear signs of forced entry, nothing broken, nothing overturned in a typical way, doors intact, windows without damage consistent with a break-in, and that changes everything. Because if no one entered, who was inside? Another detail immediately drew attention. The stains, small stains, scattered, not concentrated in a single spot. Drops, as if someone had walked through the apartment carrying something, or someone. These marks did not match an accidental fall, nor a quick invasion. And even more disturbing, some of these stains appeared to have been partially cleaned. Not completely, just enough to try to erase something in a hurry. That indicates something very specific: time and intent. Someone realized something was wrong. Someone tried to fix it, but couldn't finish. Meanwhile, outside, residents began to notice the commotion. Shouts, running, desperation. The first people to reach the child didn't know who she was or where she came from. They just saw a little girl lying there, unconscious. And one detail became impossible to ignore. The parents were not the first to ask for help. Neighbors were. Third parties were. That behavior by itself could be explained by shock. But combined with everything that came later, it took on another meaning. When police arrived, the scene was already one of commotion. Squad cars, onlookers, attempts to understand what had happened. And there, something appeared that would repeat throughout the entire case. The insistence on a single version. There were no doubts, no maybe, no room for questioning. It was as if that story had been rehearsed before the police even arrived. And that is not common. There comes a moment in every investigation when the truth no longer depends on words. It depends on evidence. Because people can lie, memories can fail, stories can be adjusted. But forensic science does not forget. It waits. When investigators returned to the apartment, there was no longer room for naive assumptions. The case had shifted. Every detail now mattered. Every inch of floor, every wall, every object. At first glance, the apartment looked merely disorganized. But under technical examination, it told a different story. A silent story, but a very clear one. The first crucial finding was simple and decisive. The absence of any sign of forced entry. No broken doors, no damaged locks, no windows consistent with an intrusion. This alone dismantled the narrative of an unknown attacker. Because forced entry always leaves marks. And there were none. What truly changed the direction of the case, however, was what could not be seen with the naked eye. Forensic experts used chemical reagents capable of revealing biological traces, even after attempts at cleaning. When the lights were dimmed and the substance was applied, hidden evidence emerged. Stains on the floor. Stains in specific areas of the apartment. Traces that confirmed something deeply disturbing. Isabella had already been injured before leaving the apartment. This finding altered the entire understanding of the case. Until then, the public narrative revolved around a fatal fall, a sudden event, an isolated tragedy. But the forensic evidence pointed to a sequence, an injury, movement inside the apartment, attempts to clean, and finally an action that ended that sequence. This was not a single accident, it was a chain of events. Another unsettling discovery came from the analysis of the vehicle. Biological traces consistent with blood were found inside the car, particularly in the area where Isabella had been seated. This suggested that the injury may have begun before the family even entered the apartment. That detail was devastating for any version that tried to minimize what happened, because it meant the tension did not begin on the 6th floor. It was already present earlier. From that point on, investigators worked with a specific hypothesis. Isabella suffered an initial injury. That injury caused distress. The distress escalated stress, and the situation spiraled out of control. Children cry, it is natural, it is communication. But in emotionally unstable environments, crying can be misinterpreted as provocation, as defiance, as something that must be stopped. And that is where dangerous decisions can occur. The forensic reports indicated signs consistent with compression, with applied force, with an attempt to restrain. There is no need for graphic detail to understand the severity of that finding. The mere presence of such evidence is enough. It points to suffering, to fear, to a struggle for air. The analysis of timing brought another painful conclusion. Had emergency help been called immediately, there may have been a chance of survival. This is one of the most devastating aspects of the case, because it is not only about what was done, but about what was not done afterward. Every minute mattered, and decisions were made, some of them irreversible. At this stage, investigators had no doubts. The initial story could not stand. It was time to confront the inconsistencies. With forensic results in hand, the investigation entered a new phase. This was no longer about speculation. It was about accountability. Interviews became longer, more detailed, more precise. Statements were taken separately, repeatedly. At first, the account seemed calm, controlled, but inconsistencies quickly surfaced. When a story is true, details may vary, but the core remains. Here, the core shifted. In one version, someone went upstairs alone. In another, everyone went together. In one statement, the return happened immediately. In another, time stretched. Individually, these differences might seem minor. Together, they formed a pattern of adjustment. Another detail stood out: the absence of questions. There were no expressions of confusion. No, what happened to her? No, did anyone see anything? There were assertions. This is unusual. People who are innocent tend to seek answers. They want to understand. Here, the truth seemed already defined. Phone records added another layer. Calls made from inside the apartment at times that contradicted the presented timeline. Calls to family members before emergency services were contacted. This detail mattered. In a real emergency, instinct usually comes first. Call for help. That night, priorities appeared different. The behavior alone did not prove guilt, but combined with everything else, it carried weight. Another psychological factor emerged. There was no genuine surprise when inconsistencies were pointed out. No indignation. There was defense, firm, immediate, as if every possibility had already been anticipated. Investigators know that truth does not need rehearsal. It may be emotional, disorganized, but it holds. A lie requires constant maintenance, and maintenance was visible. At this point, the case was no longer about what happened. It was about who did it and why. The indictment marked a turning point. The case was no longer just an investigation. It became a national reckoning. The reaction was immediate: shock, denial, outrage. Many struggled to accept the idea that such violence could occur within a family. It was easier to believe in an intruder, an accident, anything else. But investigations do not work with comfort. They work with facts, and the facts pointed inward. Public discourse intensified. Media coverage exploded. Every detail was examined. Every gesture analyzed. Meanwhile, law enforcement continued its work quietly. More forensic reviews, reenactments, timeline reconstructions. Each step reinforced the same conclusion. The original narrative did not align with reality. When the trial began, the country was already divided. But opinion is not a verdict. Everything had to be proven. The courtroom was heavy with tension. On one side, the prosecution. On the other, the defense. At the center, the memory of a child who could no longer speak. The prosecution presented the case as a sequence, minute by minute, showing that the tragedy was not a single impulsive act, but a succession of choices. Forensic reports, timelines, expert testimony. When organized, the story became impossible to ignore. The defense challenged interpretations, questioned methods, sought doubt. Because doubt is everything in a courtroom. But coherence matters. And coherence was lacking in the defense's version. Jurors watched closely. Not just the evidence, but behavior, posture, tone, the absence of spontaneity, the restraint. It mattered. One moment stood out. The confirmation that the fall was not the beginning. It was the end. That detail dismantled the idea of an unpredictable accident. The question of delayed assistance weighed heavily. Had help been called sooner, the outcome might have been different. That possibility carried moral weight. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. The decision confirmed what the investigation had shown. This was not an accident. This was not the act of a stranger. It was the result of actions taken inside the home. The sentence was read. Severe, proportional to the gravity of what had been established. There were no celebrations, only silence, because no verdict restores a life. For Isabella's mother, it was not about victory. It was about recognition. Recognition that her daughter had not been dismissed, that her suffering had been acknowledged. The case did not end with the verdict. It continued in memory. in reflection, in discomfort. It changed how Brazil talked about domestic violence, about emotional instability, about warning signs. It shattered the illusion that danger always comes from outside. Sometimes it grows quietly inside ordinary homes. Isabella's name became more than a name. It became a warning, a reminder, a responsibility. Because remembering is not about reopening wounds. It is about preventing repetition. This story is not told for shock. It is told so that silence does not protect the next tragedy. Because when society chooses to remember, it chooses to care. And care begins with attention, with listening, with intervention, even when it is uncomfortable. After the courtroom doors closed, time began to move differently for everyone involved. For those watching from the outside, life slowly returned to routine. Days passed, schedules resumed, but moving on did not mean forgetting. Dates remained, birthdays, anniversaries that now carried absence. Because absence is never filled. It is only learned to be carried. For those behind bars, time took on another shape. Long days, endless nights, a clock that never seems to move forward. A sentence is not only a legal punishment, it is a complete rupture of identity. A person stops being who they were. They become the case, the name, the thing people remember. And that follows every step. Appeals are filed. Requests are made. Narratives change over time. Words become more calculated, more restrained. But the past does not change. What happened continues to exist, regardless of any later version. There is something deeply unsettling about the silence of prison. Not just the absence of noise, but the absence of meaning. Too much time to think, too much time to remember. And remembering, in this case, is not optional. For Isabella's family, rebuilding was never simple. There is no manual for living after something like this. No roadmap. Only the daily effort to keep breathing, to find meaning where none seems to exist. And that requires a strength few people can truly imagine. Every major tragedy carries a silent question. Could this have been prevented? This question is not about assigning more blame. It is about understanding. Because understanding is the only way to prevent repetition. When the case was later examined with distance, one thing became clear. The warning signs did not appear that night. They were spread over time, fragmented, disguised as normality. And because of that, they went unnoticed. Relationships marked by constant conflict are often minimized, labeled as difficult, complicated, intense. But constant conflict wears people down, and emotional exhaustion changes behavior. One of the most ignored signs was control. Control over routines, over decisions, over people. Control does not always look like physical aggression. Sometimes it appears as impatience, excessive criticism, the need to dominate situations. And when control fails, frustration explodes. Another overlooked sign was the normalization of stress. Arguments became routine. Emotional outbursts were justified. Tension became the new normal. And when everything feels normal, nothing feels urgent. There were reports of previous conflicts, intense arguments, impulsive behavior. But none of it triggered real intervention. And this reveals a dangerous social belief, that family matters should not be questioned. That belief creates silence. Silence creates omission. And omission creates space for escalation. Children in these environments feel everything. They react, they cry more, they become more sensitive. But in emotionally immature settings, these reactions are misread. Crying becomes provocation, persistence becomes defiance, need becomes annoyance. And this creates a dangerous cycle. Experts often emphasize one crucial point. Violence against children rarely begins with an extreme act. It begins with emotional intolerance, with the inability to deal with frustration, with the refusal to seek help, with the desire to silence the problem instead of addressing it. Another ignored factor was isolation. When conflicts accumulate, people withdraw. They stop sharing. They stop seeking support. And decisions begin to be made behind closed doors, without balance, without restraint. The case made one thing painfully clear. Prevention does not happen at the moment of tragedy. It happens long before, in early warnings, in difficult conversations, in the courage to intervene. Intervening is not accusing. It is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. With time, many stories fade. Others become statistics. Some are replaced by new headlines. But certain cases remain, not because they were the most violent, but because they touched something essential. This was one of them. The name Isabella stopped being just a name. It became collective memory, a memory that carries pain, but also warning. Whenever this story is remembered, something shifts. A respectful silence, a sense of discomfort, because no one hears it without feeling something. Isabella's memory lives beyond court records. It lives in difficult conversations, in silent reflections, in changes of behavior that followed, in teachers who became more attentive, in adults who chose not to ignore signs. There is a difference between remembering and reliving. Remembering this case is not reopening wounds without purpose. It is keeping the lesson alive. Because forgetting is dangerous. This story did not happen in a distant place. It did not happen on the margins of society. It happened in an ordinary building, in an ordinary family, and that is what makes it so unsettling. It forces society to look inward, at its homes, at its relationships, at its assumptions. And questioning assumptions is uncomfortable, but necessary. If you have made it this far, it is not out of curiosity. Stories like this do not hold attention because of shock. They hold attention because they touch something deeper, something we try to ignore, but cannot. This case is not only about what happened that night. It is about everything that came before and everything that came after. About small choices that accumulate, about unresolved emotions, about silences that seem harmless until they become permanent. When a child loses their life, the question is never only how, it is why. And that why rarely fits into a single answer. It involves emotional immaturity, an inability to ask for help, the illusion of control, the normalization of stress. None of this excuses what happened, but it helps explain how extreme situations form. Understanding is not justification. It is prevention. Perhaps the most frightening part of this story is this. It does not begin with monsters. It begins with ordinary people. People who make mistakes, who feel pressure, who do not know how to manage their emotions. And when adults cannot handle their own emotions, children pay the price. Isabella had no choice, no way to defend herself, no chance to grow. But she left something behind, a warning that crying is not provocation, that impatience is not normal, that control is not care, that love without balance can become dangerous. This story does not need to be remembered with anger. It needs to be remembered with responsibility. Responsibility to pay attention, to recognize signs, to intervene before it is too late. Because prevention is quiet, but it saves lives. If you know a child living in a tense environment, observe. If constant conflict feels too normal, question it. If something makes you uncomfortable, trust that feeling. Silence is comfortable, but it comes at a high cost. Nothing in this story brings a life back. But what comes after can still make a difference. If even one child is protected because this story was remembered, then Isabella was not forgotten. If this story made you feel uncomfortable in any way, don't ignore it. Leave a like now. It helps this video reach more people. Subscribe to the channel, because there are stories that must not be forgotten. And watch the next video appearing on your screen. Silence protects those who do wrong. Information protects those without a voice.